And welcome back to my channel. If you're new to my YouTube channel, I am an Irish vlogger, curator, historian based in Northern Ireland, and I make videos about history, culture, travel and lifestyle, mainly sort of an alternative, vintage, non-mainstream lifestyle. So you'll not see any mainstream fashion or get ready with me videos here, though you might see some vintage ones in the future. So welcome back to number three, yeah, I think, of my Sewn podcast. I've decided not to do an actual audio podcast, just a video podcast about different aspects of fashion history, particularly Western fashion history. And today I'm going to talk to you about the history of home sewing. And I've linked my blog post up here that I've done on the history of home sewing. Now, if you don't know, I do some independent work as a dress historian, and my specialism is Irish dress history in the 20th century, between like 1920 till about 1965, 1970. Basically an excuse for me to look at lovely old clothes, and I collect and wear lots of vintage clothing. Not wearing vintage today except for this fabulous red 1950s beaded necklace that I got from a charity shop for 50p. Love charity shops. Might actually do a video about how to get bargains in charity shops. But anyway, I'm going to talk about home sewing. So I come from a background of women who worked in linen factories. This linen is obviously a very famous export, or was a very famous export from Ireland, Northern Ireland, Republic of Ireland. Up until very recently, there are still some looms or weavers and factories that still produce linen, but not on a mass industrial scale as we did in the past. And also my granny would have worked in a stitching factory, so that would have been a factory that would have stitched hems, stitched home textile, domestic textiles, as just basically finishing off the product that was maybe made elsewhere in the factory or in a different factory. And one of my earliest memories is sitting on my granny's knee learning to knit and sew. My mum sews, my aunt sews, my sister doesn't, but I love to sew. And sewing and knitting, I really need to actually make more of my own clothes and do more sewing, because I have two Singer sewing machines and I love the old black Singer sewing machines, and I know how to do all the different embroidery types, sewing stitch types with all the different feet. And I don't use an electronic one where you just press it and it does it yourself. I know how to do it manually, so I really need to do it. But knitting is one of my top things for self-care, because it's very meditative and it's really, really relaxing, and I just love to sew and knit, make do and mend. As I'm on a low income, if something tears, button falls off, the hem falls down, I can't afford to replace it and I can do it myself. I'm going to do it myself. That's why I'm a big advocate for learning to sew, knit, mend your clothes. It doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, it just means you save money and your lovely garments stay lovely for longer. But anyway, on to the topic of this podcast, history of home sewing. So I'm going to do a pre-1851 and an after 1851, because in 1851 is when Isaac Singer patented the first ever manual sewing machine, and it changed the home sewing and sewing industry and textile industry forever. So before 1851, sort of, well, two categories, and the same after 1851, of people who I think home sewed. So there was the middle class, so sort of middle class, upper middle class aristocracy that would have sewn probably for pleasure, but maybe the middle class also for having garments last longer, because garments and material and making your own clothes was very expensive. Even after the advent of the Singer sewing machine, it's an alliteration word, it's hard to pronounce, in 1851. It was still expensive. So we would think of maybe the poorer woman in tenement flats in like Scotland, or cottages in Ireland, or anywhere in rural UK, Europe, etc. would have done home sewing, because she had out of just sheer necessity. She had no other option but to home sew. And also all your garments would have been sewn by someone at home, by your maids or yourself. So that's pretty much where home sewing came from, as was a necessity. And then also, as maybe an upper class woman might have embroidered slippers for her husband or her son, maybe done knitting for the poor on her estate, and maybe had made up old garments for maybe her daughter's dolls, stuff like that. And home sewing has always been feminine, domesticated, and was a part of a girl's education right up until the 1950s. And you could sew and knit and produce garments and do mending, just to show that you were domesticated and that you would make a perfect wife and mother. So as I said, in 1851, and I hope I'm not turning too fast because my battery is flashing, I should have charged this beforehand. In 1851, Isaac Singer patented the first manual sewing machine in America, changed everything. It was expensive to have at first, but factories started to buy them and employed more women that would have originally been piece workers or garment makers in the home to go to these factories. Not exactly sanitary as it was in the home, because it was sweated labour and for pittance and often long hours and no health and safety. But this started to revolution the textile and the fabric and the clothing industry, and it'll give rise to the ready-to-wear industry from the late 19th century right up until modern day. So by the late 1900s you start to see a decline in sort of women making clothing at home. It still was done, but mainly working class women it sort of went down to. I put my resources down in the description box below. And sewing really became a hobby, as you see in the 1870s, 1890s in this blog post. Embroidery, sewing, showing off your domestic skills as a needlewoman really started becoming a hobby more than a necessity for maybe lower middle class women, and well, that was a hobby. And then you get women going into the textile factories, being able to take more fabric home, maybe getting a second-hand sewing machine between maybe 1 or 4 houses, or even a whole row of houses, and being able to make more fashionable clothes. And towards the end of the century you see women in lower middle class society, working class society, being able to wear more fashionable clothes like the crinoline, the bustle, the lambeth button sleeve, and the pigeon breast, as in the way the waist was in the Edwardian era, because the sewing machine. And also a really big revolutionary thing for home sewing was in the 1860s when Ebenezer Butterick still makes patterns, patented and made fabric patterns for clothes, which was pretty much revolutionary at the time, which meant that a woman could buy a pattern for very little money, and she had spare fabric. She could make a fashionable dress that could last her for years. Fabric could cut down for her daughter, for a doll, for a relative, or for somebody else. You know, the pattern could be reused, and so did the clothing. So the time we get to sort of 1900, 1914, start of the Great War, home sewing is booming, and it is very important still for a girl to be able to sew, knit, embroider, crochet, do loads of domestic things, as well as using it for a trade. It may go into service as a sewing maid or a lady's maid, or into a factory, or even set herself up as a dressmaker, because even at this point there were still very few things for women to be able to set up in business and work for themselves. So with the advent of World War I, people started knitting comforts for troops. So again, sewing was really big, but then you start seeing more manuals and women's magazines with ideal domestic situations of women sitting by the fire with their children, sewing and knitting. We also got knitting patterns, you got clothing patterns with Vogue. You would have gotten clothing patterns to make the fashionable 20s flappers dresses and previous dresses at home with minimal fabric, and your, again, sewing machine, because sewing machines at this stage were a bit more affordable for the lower middle class, a working class woman, so therefore they could make their own clothes. And then home sewing became popular, but then as sort of like a twofold thing, when fashions became simpler after the First World War, with a straight up and down look at the flappers, less people were home sewing, but then more people were home sewing because the fashions were easier to make than the frou-frou-filliness of a Edwardian dress. And so as it declined, it went up again in the 1930s, and obviously in World War II, because of the depression and the necessity to make things last longer and hem things, and home sewing was really essential for if you wanted your clothes to last longer, because you didn't have the money, because you had to feed your children, feed yourself, pay your rent, or even look for a job. So your dress you bought in 1930 might have been worn for maybe 10 years or more. Very simple, that you wanted to keep all of your clothes intact and learn to sew. And again, it's still part of a girl's education, right from the working class to upper class, to be able to sew, knit, embroider and crochet. And then you have World War II with Make, Do and Mend, and Mrs. So-and-so in 1943, the British Ministry of Information published the Make, Do and Mend booklet of how to make, do and mend clothes, how to make, do and mend with all your clothes that you have. So you might have turned your husband's suit into a dress, you might have turned curtains into your daughter's dress, and if you didn't know how to do this, you could be taught how to do it, or you could have went to Make, Do and Mend classes and been shown how to make, do and mend. And then after World War II, because clothes rationing in Britain stayed on until 1949, people were still home sewing, they were still hemming, they were still crocheting, and you'd see a lot of linens from this time with crinoline ladies. So there would have been a pattern, a paper pattern, and you would have put it on a piece of linen, and you would have sewn or embroidered on it, and then you would have picked away the pattern. So it's a form of decorative decorative wear that you could put into your house if you didn't have a lot of money, especially in working class, lower middle class families. This sort of domesticated idea was also showing off that women could embroider and have time, even with a big family or domestic chores, that you could still beautify your house but through the means of home sewing. In the 1950s, again, patterns very popular, women making the circle skirts that were very fashionable, and the big frilly petticoats again that were fashionable. I actually have quite a few 1950s homemade dresses and they're amazing. And it wasn't really until the 60s and the 70s where it started to decline and fabric prices went up, and it was cheaper to actually just buy the clothes, because by the stage ready to wear was pretty much everywhere and couture was declining. And even though in the 60s it was the shift dresses, very simple fashion, again like the 20s it was just going steadily down. And by the 1980s, well, it was the me generation, and people didn't really want to sew. To have your own sewing machine and have your own clothes made was really unfashionable. But then between the 1980s and now, there has been quite a lot of economic depressions, and in the last 10-15 years home sewing has went on the up. I should put a graph here going up, and sewing machines are going up and up and up and up. Or as a sewing machine, you're just sewing more and more fabric. This is the motion I make for a sewing machine. And especially with the rise in interest in vintage clothing and make, do and mend, the last 10-15 years home sewing has really seen a resurgence. And it's not taught in schools anymore. I think it should be taught in schools, not just to girls obviously, but to boys too, just to be able to have things last longer. I'm on a low, as well as if you're in a low income like myself, it means I can sew stuff and keep stuff for a lot longer. So that's the history of home sewing. I've linked all the blog posts and references below. I'm sorry it's not like all jazzy with like loads of posters and paper and all ephemera and different things. I don't have a lot of money at the minute.